Chapter 14, Becoming a World Power, the late 1800s. Imperialism was big during this time. Nations were expanding overseas. Bigger and stronger nations took over smaller nations, looking for raw materials for factories. There was lots of foreign competition with high tariffs, which are taxes on trade. Many countries wanted to invest in the smaller countries so they would have a monopoly on the raw materials. Nations exert control over these countries to protect their investments. For example, in Hawaii, Queen Liliuokalani of Hawaii was forced to step down when the United States took over. America wanted to be seen by the world as a dominant power in Latin America and the Pacific. The Spanish-American War starts in the late 1890s. Spain controlled Cuba and Puerto Rico at this time. They were the last remaining colonies in the Western Hemisphere. Cuba was enslaved by the Spanish. The workers were forced to work on sugarcane plantations. The Cuban rebels launch a guerrilla war, but they are unsuccessful with the stronger Spanish. However, Americans were invested in the sugar plantations, and yellow journalism helped to spur the Americans into backing the Cubans. Today, yellow journalism is called fake news. For example, one of the fake news stories was in 1898, the USS Maine exploded in the Cuban harbor of Havana. The newspapers reported the Spanish had bombed it, when here it was probably a mechanical issue. This really spurred the Americans into pushing our president, McKinley, to help the Cubans and the Puerto Ricans. In April of 1898, President McKinley asked for a declaration of war. He demanded Spain withdraw from Puerto Rico and declare Cuba independent. They refused, and the war started. In July of 1898, the U.S. soldiers attacked San Juan Hill and Kettle Hill in Cuba, winning against the Spanish. It was an American victory. The Rough Riders were one group that fought. They were under the command of Teddy Roosevelt. However, not reported was also the Black 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments, which fought at Kettle Hill, Cuba, and many of them received the Medal of Honor for bravery, but that was never reported in the newspapers due to racism in the United States at the time. In May of 1898, Americans will fight the Spanish, who were occupying the Philippines in the Eastern Hemisphere. Spain tries to flee, but we force them to surrender. Spain gives the United States the island of Guam, which is near Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. Cuba becomes independent. Puerto Rico becomes a protectorate of the United States. New American diplomacy. 1899, we had what was called an open door policy. We wanted to trade with China. We built a Panama Canal in Panama, which is in Central America, so that boats and ships could sail from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean quickly, instead of going all the way around the tip of South America. In 1902, the Roosevelt Corollary was created, and the United States vowed that we would keep the Western Hemisphere safe. And there's a picture of the Panama Canal and where it's located. The United States is in yellow. The Mexican Revolution heats up during this time. In 1911, Mexican people were upset over poverty. In February of 1913, the rebels seized power. It was believed that they ordered the murder of their former president. However, at this time, some American Navy sailors were detained for entering a restricted area. Once they were released, the American commander demanded an apology from this new Mexican government, and they refused. Wilson asked Congress to allow troops to use force in Mexico, and in 1916, Pancho Villa and a group of guerrillas killed 16 Americans in Columbus, New Mexico. Wilson was unsuccessful in overthrowing Huerta, but we wound up with other problems around this time, including World War I. In 1915-1916, Wilson sent troops to Haiti and the Dominican Republic to keep them democratic. The Dominican Republic had more success than Haiti since that time. Haitians suffer more poverty and government problems today than the Dominican Republic. However, 1/3 of all Dominican Republic citizens still do live in poverty today.